Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. As called by the U.S. National Security Council coordinator, the Camp David summit is expected to boost trilateral cooperation among Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo to a whole new level. The Camp David principles are going to be unveiled, and some media outlets say the focus of these will be on institutionalizing relationships, thereby making it harder for Seoul and Tokyo to reverse course following recent improvements in their ties. However, lingering issues between the two, ranging from historical disputes to the release of Fukushima wastewater, are not easy things to just overlook. How should such matters be dealt with in order to enhance their partnership? For an in-depth analysis, we have invited Professor Hyun-jin of Kyung University into the studio. Professor Choi, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Bo-kyung.
Good evening. And we also have Frank Zanuzzi, President and CEO of the Marine and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Good to see you, Mr. Zanuzzi.
Good evening. It's great to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Professor Choi, first question. On Liberation Day, President Yoon stressed that the independence movement was to build a nation that is free and democratic. How did you see those remarks, given the clear trend of South Korea aligning with Washington and Tokyo?
So as you said, the President Yoon Suk-yeol said we must remember those who gave their all for their freedom and independence and also universal values of our country. And also emphasized that remembering them is the essence of our national identity. And after saying that, he emphasized the importance of a trilateral cooperation, especially with Japan, and saying that we are now partners who share our values and common interests. And he also said, as security and economic partner, the Korea and Japan will continue to cooperate in a forward-looking manner, contributing to global peace and prosperity together. And also he added to block North Korea's nuclear and missile threat. The three countries, Korea, US, and Japan, must closely cooperate on intelligence and share North Korean missile and nuclear information in real time. And this speech is a good indication of the future direction of South Korea's diplomacy. The confrontation between the US and China intensifies, and Russia and Ukraine are at war. And also we have a very worrying security crisis in front of us called the new Cold War. So in this situation, we must think about who are we going to cooperate to protect our security. And I think President Yoon believes that Japan is the only liberal democracy in Northeast Asia. And we have the similar values and freedom and also human rights standard and the rule of law. And therefore, it is likely that the President Yoon will promote the so-called value-based trilateral alliance in the foreseeable future.
Right, so he was indeed stressing the importance of cooperation with Japan.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, as part of efforts to secure liberal democracy, President Yoon underlined Seoul-Tokyo ties, citing United Nations Commanders' 7 bases in Japan, serving as the greatest deterrent keeping the North Korea from invading the South. Now, could you give us more details on this and some insight into what President Yoon intended with his remarks?
Of course. Well, I think President Yoon wisely understands that no realistic defense plan of the Korean Peninsula can be undertaken by multilateral forces without heavy reliance upon naval, air, logistics, intelligence, and other rapid response forces, which are based in the rear area of Japan. This reality has long been true on the Korean Peninsula, but Korean leaders have sometimes been reluctant to acknowledge it, based on the historical sensitivities of forces from Japan being in any way involved in the defense of the Korean Peninsula, even if those forces were indeed United Nations forces or US forces. So I think the president has a clear understanding of the strategic realities on the Korean Peninsula and the need to bolster deterrence in the face of common security challenges. But as Professor Choi has outlined, I think the real significance of President Yoon's commitment to the US-Japan ROK triangle goes far beyond the security challenges specific to the defense of the Korean Peninsula. It's really a global alignment based on shared values in addition to those shared security interests. And I believe that the Camp David summit itself, which will take place very soon, is going to be a celebration not only of the practical requirements for the defense of the peninsula against a growing North Korean ballistic missile threat, but also about what the three countries can do together in the world in the defense of liberal democratic norms and values.
Right, I see. Now let's delve a little bit deeper into the Trilateral Summit then. So Professor Choi, Camp David Principles is expected to include holding these trilateral meetings on a regular basis and also setting up a so-called crisis hotline. What significance such measures have?
Yes, I believe the Camp David principles are expected to be announced at the Trilateral Summit. And it is likely that these principles include the strengthening of military cooperation and the establishment of a hotline between the three leaders and the obligation to consult in the event of a military crisis and also regularization of a meeting. The idea is to create a separate set of principles in addition to the joint statement to showcase the three countries' willingness to cooperate for security affairs. And I think these principles have three major implications. The first, sending a clear message to North Korea and China that the Trilateral Alliance is strengthening its military and economic ties. And the U.S. President Joe Biden has made strengthening the trilateral cooperation as a centerpiece of its East Asian strategy. And the three countries are going to take the trilateral cooperation to the next level in dealing with North Korea's nuclear program and also balancing against China. And secondly, the Biden administration has emphasized the importance of improved relations between South Korea and also Japan, which is essential to contain also China. And these principles are intended to prevent the Korea-Japan relationship from slipping backwards in the future. And also lastly, creating a trilateral security coordination system, though not as formal as NATO or Quad. Although the summit is unlikely to produce a formal security treaty with the trilateral security commitment, the three countries are expected to agree on a mutual understanding of defense responsibilities in the region.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, staying on the security cooperation front, according to the Wall Street Journal, training to track and destroy ballistic missiles using radar, satellite, and weapon systems will be part of discussions between the three countries. Now, what are current joint military exercises between the three countries like, and what would such a change mean?
The three militaries share a common technological platform. They have similar Aegis missile defense systems. They are able to work together, in theory, to shoot down missiles coming from North Korea that might be headed toward the Korean Peninsula, toward Japan, or indeed toward the United States. But militaries fight as they practice, and the three nations have never conducted high-level integrated missile defense exercises. So although up till now, most of the military exercises have been focused on maritime security, anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue missions at sea, the transition toward integrated missile defense training, identifying threats inside North Korea, such as road mobile ICBM missile launchers, monitoring them for potential launch, tracking their flight using satellites and other technical means, and then intercepting them before they can reach their target. All of this requires practice by the three militaries, and I think it's a very reassuring signal that the three nations are pursuing a deepening of their military training to respond to what is a growing DPRK ballistic missile threat, including both road mobile ICBM capabilities such as the Hwasong 17 and Hwasong 18 missiles, but also a wide array of shorter range, potentially nuclear capable ballistic missiles in the North Korean arsenal. So this is a welcome bolstering of the three nations' ability to have extended nuclear deterrence against growing threats.
Right, I see. So joint military exercises will indeed go to the next level. Now, Professor Choi, during a written interview with Bloomberg News, President Yoon stressed that he is leaving the door open for greater cooperation with two other countries on extended deterrence, and he said that separate consultations will also be possible. Is it hinting at the possibility of having Japan included in the nuclear consultative group?
Okay. To interpret the meaning of a separate consultation is not easy, but I will do my best. The United States and South Korea launched the Nuclear Consultative Group, which is called NCG, last month,
Right.
as a follow-up to the Washington Declaration, and to jointly plan, consult, and implement deterrence against North Korea. And on the other hand, the United States and Japan also established an extended deterrence dialogue in 2010 and have been holding regular meetings. So this means that there are two separate dialogue and consultation body. One is between United States and South Korea, and the other is between US and Japan.
Right.
And therefore, the separate consultation that President Yoon mentioned in his interview are believed to indicate a higher body, which is like an umbrella that encompasses these two separate security alliances between the US and Japan and US and Korea, rather than including Japan in the NCG. And therefore, the presidential office of South Korea and also explained that the meaning of a separate consultation is that South Korea is open to trilateral consultation on extended deterrence, which is separate from the NCG. So in general, all these efforts, the two bilateral dialogue and also the separate consultation, and they can be seen as an attempt to create a trilateral high-level security framework to increase its effectiveness.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Choi, one more question. It seems like the cooperation between the three countries are becoming more and more comprehensive and extensive. And the first Deputy Director of National Security, Kim Tae-ho, he said that the three countries will launch multiple consultative bodies, not just in the military information sharing, but also on AI and the cyber issues and economic issues as well. How do you see this?
Yes, Kim Tae-ho said that the three leaders will also discuss cooperation in high technology, the artificial intelligence, and also cyber issues for the future growth engines of the three countries, and also joint response to economic security issues such as global supply chain and energy.
Right.
In an interview, the President Yoon also said that the three countries will plan to further build up the cooperation system to strengthen the resilience of the global supply chain, the conducting joint research and cooperation in key emerging technologies, such as AI, quantum, and space. So what does it mean? So to answer this, I need to mention what was done by White House last week on August 8th. So Joe Biden signed an executive order that was designed to limit investment into China's semiconductor industry, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. And the move was a response to China's decision to curb exports of raw materials used for chips and electric cars. And all these developments represent an ever-intensifying rivalry between the US and China. And therefore, it seems to me that Joe Biden is going to ask Korea and Japan to support and participate in this American policy in high technology rivalry with China.
Right. So would it be safe to say the cooperation, trilateral cooperation, is becoming extensive in order to contain China?
Yeah, right.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, experts say the focus of the Trilateral Summit is to enhance Seoul and Tokyo ties. And according to the Financial Times, the U.S. might push South Korea and Japan to agree to consult with each other in the event of an attack. Now, how do you see the possibility of such a discussion?
Well, I think that indeed those kinds of discussions already have been happening at a working level for many years. But I want to come back, if I might, to the question of containment of China versus competition with China and de-risking. Because as Professor Choi has correctly laid out, the US, the Republic of Korea, and Japan share values and strategic interests. And one of those interests is that none of them wish to be dependent upon China for the high technology chips or materials, products that are necessary to drive our own technological innovation. And so the friend-shoring of critical capabilities among these three countries and working with other countries like Indonesia and Australia to ensure a reliable supply of rare earth elements and critical minerals and high technology chips for advanced military and civilian technology. But this is a very important strategic development. But I think it's less about containing China and more about beating China in the global race for high technology, AI, quantum computing. So it's a race that is underway. And it's not so much about cheering for China to trip. It's about strengthening the ability of the South Koreans, the Japanese and American companies and governments to win that race. I think on the defense field, the consultations about contingency planning, not just for the Korean Peninsula, but also for other regional contingencies to include peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. But this kind of high-level defense coordination and consultation has been going on in the past. It's going to intensify in the aftermath of this historic trilateral summit, which is going to commence tomorrow morning.
Right, I see. Now, Washington's attempt to bring Seoul and Tokyo together is quite getting clear, but there are lingering issues. And so, Professor Choi, first are issues regarding history, such as Tokyo Islands, comfort women, and forced labor. How are they affecting ties between these two countries?
Okay. In his Liberation Day speech, the President Yoon didn't directly mention those lingering issues. For example, he didn't mention Dokdo Islands during his speech. Instead, he called for future-oriented cooperation and exchanges with Japan. And indeed, Yoon has consistently sent a message of a change in bilateral relation with Japan, resolving the thorny issue of forced labor, and also traveling to Japan before Washington. And with Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Seoul in this May, the normal so-called shuttle diplomacy between the two countries was restored after 12 years of trouble. However, as you said, so there are still some landmines, such as Japan's claim to the Dokdo Islands, and also distortion of history in their textbooks. And Prime Minister Kishida also sent a ritual offering to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine on this Tuesday, and which is a symbol of a former Japanese military aggression in China and South Korea.
Right.
But I believe now it's Japan's turn to respond to President Yoon's sincerity, and I hope Japan will respond to the move of South Korea with a more sincere attitude to open a new bilateral relationship without provoking historical disputes with its neighbors.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, now another issue the two countries face is Japan's planned discharge of wastewater from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Now, how are its discussions over this issue going on, and how should such lingering issues be dealt with in order for two countries to go forward?
Thank you for the question. Earlier this year, the Mansfield Foundation took a group of American congresspeople to Fukushima to study the site and to discuss the release of the ALPS-treated water into the Pacific Ocean. We then traveled together to Seoul, along with Japanese Diet members, to hold some quiet trilateral discussions, US, Japan, ROK, about both the Fukushima issue and other issues pertinent to the trilateral relationship. I think the key to the successful release of ALPS-treated water from Fukushima is, as your earlier segment described, transparency and accountability and the full participation of Korean experts as well as the international community in observing that process to make sure that it is consistent with international safety standards. Everything I've seen about the planned release of the Alps treated water from Fukushima gives me confidence that the Japanese government is following best practices and that this release poses no threat either to the Japanese people or to anyone else. But I believe that transparency and the participation of Korean experts is critical to the success of this and in building confidence among the international community that the release of the treated water is indeed safe. Let me just say that the South Korean nuclear industry is one of the most advanced, capable, and technologically sophisticated nuclear industries in the entire world. They know that this treated water can be released safely, and I think their voices are very important here because I don't think that the Korean people should listen only to international experts from the IAEA or Japan or the United States. They should also consult their own national experts who understand this process very well.
Right, I see. I cannot agree more. Now, Mr. Zanuzzi, we are running out of time, but I would like to ask you this last question. Now, though stalled for now, South Korea, Japan, and China have had regular meetings, and Seoul is actually pushing for a resumption of talks within this year as a host. Now, if the Seoul-Washington-Tokyo meeting becomes regularized, how could Seoul and Tokyo work together at this whole Tokyo-Beijing summit?
Well, very briefly, I think that the United States is a Pacific power, but it is not an Asian nation. And it's essential that Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing work together on critical issues and the challenges they share, including climate change, pandemic prevention, keeping the ocean safe, making sure that there's enough fish in the ocean for everyone to eat. And so I think these kinds of consultations are essential. They don't pose any threat to the United States. To the contrary, if the U.S., ROK, and Japan can strengthen their trilateral relations, and if Korea and Japan can become in closer alignment, when those two Western democratic allies sit down with the Chinese, those meetings will be more effective if the Korean and Japanese delegates are on the same page. So I welcome the development of a trilateral summitry with China. And I hope that Korea and Japan will coordinate closely in advance of such meetings to ensure good outcomes.
All right, I see your point, and I hope so too. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Well, thank you, Mr. Zanuzzi, for your time and insights. Thank you.
감사합니다.
감사합니다. And thank you, Professor Choi, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.